What's up, guys? This is Derek, moreplates.moredates.com. Today I'm going to be doing a follow-up video to some threads that came to my attention on the internet that were sort of relevant subject matters to my video and either may have addressed the video specifically. Some of them actually reference my video, and then comments in the comment section about, common questions and concerns and things that needed clarification that I thought I should make a follow-up video for and whatnot. But to preface this whole thing, this is definitely going to be a really, really long video. This is a complicated subject, and talking about it the way I want to talk about, I can't be constrained by like a 5-minute block to really elaborate the way I need to. For those that do want to stick around and listen to it, I would advise just turning up the speed on the player thing on YouTube and just listening along. So anyways, if you're gonna stick around, let's get right into it. First of all, let's go. The first thing I want to cover is, just to be clear, that video, I think most of you guys got it, but that video is not to downplay how bad DHT is for your hair. Like, DHT is terrible. It's the worst androgen in your body for miniaturizing hair follicles. It's several fold more androgenic than testosterone. I think I made that pretty clear in the video. So just to clarify, DHT still needs to be addressed. The whole point of the video was to state that androgens as a whole endogenously need to be addressed, not just the DHT portion. So the first thing I want to talk about is testosterone's role in stimulating prostate growth. So I saw, it came to my attention, a few people sent it to me. There was a thread made talking about how Dutasteride and TRT is like pretty much the way to maintain physiological functions associated that we have fulfilled by androgens in the first place, as well as completely prevent hair loss. So I had the same theory a couple of years ago. Like, this thread actually referenced my video specifically, so that's kind of why I'm bringing it up too. So this guy's what he's proposing is basically what I thought before all of my experiments in 2018. So I thought, okay, well, finasteride and dutasteride, you're pretty much safe from testosterone because the DHT is addressed. So, like, obviously, first of all, with finasteride, you still have 30% of your systemic DHT, which is intact, which is still going to wreak havoc, and then DHT addressed by Dutasteride, despite it, apparently being only 90% inhibition. In some cases, they say that. My blood work shows it was like 100%. Like, the blood work couldn't even read my DHT because it was below the detection limit. So even with a super physiological amount of testosterone in my system from pinning an exogenous source of it and pushing my test on purpose to 2,000 nanograms per deciliter, I still had zero DHT in my system because Dutasteride is just that effective at inhibiting the 5-AR. So we've established how strong Dutasteride really is and how much it can actually, inhibit the androgenic metabolite DHT. Like, we already know it's good enough to totally take care of that part of the equation. The thing, though, is what I thought, too, a couple of years ago is, okay, well, if I just crush that to zero, it's the equivalent of castration, and then I'll just fulfill the physiological properties that I would normally have got from androgens via my testosterone administration. Because I'm thinking, okay, well, if I have zero DHT, I can theoretically just, now that I know Dutasteride totally inhibits DHT even when you push your T above the reference range of normal endogenous production, you still have full inhibition. So that was my first part to see that, is I wanted to see, okay, well, that's cool if Dutasteride inhibits all your DHT, but then you have that disparity of less androgens in your system fulfilling the properties that DHT would normally do. So I thought, okay, well, maybe you would need to push your test higher than reference range in order to fulfill that, disparity that you're now losing from having no DHT. But when you increase your test, do you still have do you have some residual DHT that's not being taken care of because you're in like genetic outlier territory now of unnatural test levels? So that was the first thing the experiment addressed, was to see if dutasteride still inhibits testosterone conversion enough to the point where you can use unlimited amounts of test and still inhibit 5AR completely, essentially. So in theory, based on my blood work results, you could use like a high dosage of testosterone to push your levels to however high you want, but keep DHT at 0. So I thought, okay, great. So I can just use more test, keep all my hair, and not have any, miniaturization of hair follicles because my DHT is 0 regardless of how much my test goes up. But that just wasn't the case, guys. Like, the whole point of it was to exemplify how even once I accomplished that, I had continuous androgenic side effects just from testosterone the entirety of the time I had 0 DHT. So I still had facial hair growth. I still had body hair growth, like a lot. I'm really prone to body hair. Is it genetic? Is it androgen dependent? I think it's both, but I still had to manscape once a week to keep it under control, which was, I had to do anyways before when I had normal amounts of DHT in my body. I still have to shave every other day. Like, I still have significant androgenic activity in my body. So the first thing that I think needs to be taken into consideration that's largely overlooked is the fact that finasteride and dutasteride were created to address prostate. Like, that was the intention of the drug. It wasn't to address hair loss. It's just they realized a side benefit of inhibiting prostate growth by systemically inhibiting DHT conversion is your hair can grow back because there's less miniaturization occurring. But what you guys, I feel like goes, well, it does not, I feel like it definitely goes overlooked. If you go look at the clinical data on testosterone itself, you can clearly see that it has androgenic stimulation of the prostate itself, like inherently, not relating to DHT whatsoever. On its own, its selectivity is 2-to-1, which is not good whatsoever for what we would want it to do. Like, ideally, you want to have an anabolic in your body that fulfills all of the anabolic properties of testosterone and has as minimal of an androgenic effect as possible. So this is totally counterproductive to being, like, if you're a male in general, just the fact that you're a guy, the hormone profile is counterproductive to itself. And what I mean by that is you rely on androgens for libido, for, sensitivity in the penis, for, muscle growth, for recovery, for all these things, for masculinization, for all these things that are fulfilled directly by androgens. But testosterone itself, the reason you can even operate and function without any DHT in your system at all is because testosterone has that androgenic component, and it has that 2-to-1 selectivity for muscle tissue to prostate. So that's great and all because it fulfills the androgenic properties that would otherwise be somewhat fulfilled by DHT. But in the absence of DHT, tests can theoretically be pushed up enough to fulfill those, physiological functions. But the problem with that is when you fulfill those very physiological functions, you also miniaturize hair follicles. Like, it's just the total paradox of being a male. It's counterproductive to itself. Because if you have maximal, say you have optimized, libido, optimized sensitivity sexually, you have optimized muscle growth, you have all these things optimized, just by having those very things optimized by sufficient androgen levels, you're also causing miniaturization of hair follicles. Because that's just the entire reason the Propecia works, is because it can directly reduce prostate size via inhibiting DHT, which we have already acknowledged inhibiting that DHT is also what prevents progression of hair loss. So if you have, the opposite side of the spectrum, if you increase androgen levels in the body, then that sensitivity, libido goes up, sensitivity sexually goes up, hair loss miniaturization goes up, Facial hair growth goes up. Prostate growth goes up. It's all directly correlated to one another. This is why if you have a guy who decides to transition from male to female, what's a common protocol they'll be given? Be given an oral anti-androgen and oral estrogen a lot of the time. So what's this accomplish? It brings their, the one study I was looking at recently was a study on a guy who had a serum testosterone level of 455 nanograms per deciliter, significant male pattern baldness. When he transitioned from male to female, he used oral, what is it called? Spironolactone. I forget what it is. It's like aldactone, essentially. That's the brand name for it, I guess. And then he also used oral estrogen. So what did he accomplish via this? It dropped his serum testosterone down to like 11 nanograms per deciliter, which is like nothing. And the result of that was significant inhibition of facial hair and body hair growth. Because, I'm sure his prostate size went down too, reducing the androgen load on your body. But he also started regrowing hair and reversing his male pattern baldness. Like, is this coincidental? It's not. Like, this is why guys are using, anti-androgens is one of the main, things that are being looked at right now in the hair loss community. And then in the downstream of the cascade of events that eventually lead to the miniaturization of the hair follicle, there's prostaglandin theory and stuff like that, which I think should be considered absolutely, because if you can find a drug that's effective enough to, block that cascade of events at a different downstream mechanism than at the root of the issue, which is the androgen, then that works too. But the entire premise of the whole concept of hair loss still derives back to the androgens. So even if you have DHT crushed to zero, like if you go look at my hair throughout my videos from before I used Dutasteride to the middle of my experiment, and like I ran it for over a year, guys. Like these videos aren't all posted at the exact same time. I have a lot of backlogged videos because I was off YouTube for a while and I just wasn't posting. A lot of my videos in the middle of 2018, if you go look at them, I had really bad thinning, and that was in the middle of my Dutasteride experiment. Like I ran it for a year straight on just TRT. So you would think, oh, well, he had zero DHT, and then the test, fulfills that. Like my libido was on point. My libido was perfect. I had no erectile dysfunction whatsoever. I didn't lose really any muscle, to be honest, which is notable, because that's one of the things I used to worry about when I was younger is 5-AR inhibitors and muscle, how it affects muscle growth. I'm not trying to bodybuild necessarily to some severe extent anymore, so it's less of a concern than it used to be. Like if I was still trying to, get on stage or something, then I would care a lot more. And DHT plays a role in terms of body composition when you stand on stage and the hardening effect and whatnot, muscle hardening. But, that's getting off track. The point is I didn't experience a negative inhibition of performance in the gym or my physique just dropping muscle tissue. Like the anabolic and androgenic components of my body were fulfilled entirely by the testosterone. There was no DHT in the equation whatsoever. Like not even residual amounts, like absolutely none. On paper, I have DHT levels lower than like a little girl. Like that's how low they are. So, when you're looking at this from a standpoint of it's just DHT, like you can't look at it like that. Like a lot of people would claim, oh, you didn't wait for the shedding phase to discontinue, so that's why you notice regression or whatever on the Dutasteride. But I was on it for over a year, guys. Like I made sure I did this experiment properly so I would know. As my, my priorities changed over the years and I stopped caring about bodybuilding as much and started caring more about hair, I started to give 5-AR inhibitors more of a chance in my head. I used to, think they were the devil, but I started to research more and, realize what the androgenic component of certain anabolics really do in the body and how it really plays out in the whole like cascade of events. And so I started the Dutasteride, and I would have kept running it if it worked the way I thought it was going to work, but it didn't inhibit the testosterone at all. Like, I had like 2,000 nanograms per deciliter of test that was blatantly accelerating my loss. I didn't use an anti-androgen for like all of 2018 because I didn't want to skew my results, and because I still sort of thought in my head exactly what some of you guys did about the shedding. And once the shedding's done, then it's going to be fine and it'll regrow. And how can you lose hair on Dutasteride? It's just not possible, is what I thought. But it definitely is, guys. You have to consider all androgens here. And this is why 5-AR inhibitors don't work for everyone. And the main way to truly get rid of hair loss is either via topical inhibition of all androgens, not just DHT, but also testosterone, or a combination of, systemic inhibition of androgens and topically. Like, there's a variety of ways to do it. Or there's, people who transition from male to female who just, completely nuke their systemic endogenous production entirely. Now, obviously, I don't have a recommendation for any of the scenarios of which way to go about it, or even if you should go about it at all. But I can definitively tell you that while it's not as androgenic as DHT, and DHT is like the number one thing to get rid of here, or to take into account, that is, because it's not like you need to get rid of it in all scenarios. Like, there's some people that are not sensitive to it. There's some people with 5-AR defects. There's some people that respond really well to anti-androgens topically. Like, there's a variety of situations. But you just need to, when you're making a protocol or you're looking into this stuff, like, I strongly urge you to consider both androgens. Like, I am positive it has to do with both of them based on my experience. And you guys need to consider, too, all these guys that come up with alternative theories in terms of, no, it's chronic elevated estrogen that's the problem, or it's chronic prolactin elevation, or it's thyroid imbalances and deficiencies, or it's liver damage and such. Like, I don't really know. I haven't seen any of these guys who make these bold claims actually get blood work to establish this is what's causing my hair loss. You can see over the, this is my, liver enzymes. These are my liver enzymes. These are my estrogen levels. These are my prolactin levels. And I'm experiencing significant androgenic alopecia right now. They just pull they extrapolate data out of a study and then try and relate it into their own established theory. They try to make a blanket statement for everyone. It's just not the case. Like, I get blood work like several times a year. If you've seen my other content, I get blood work a lot. I've had my liver enzymes checked. I have thyroid panel done several times a year because I used to abuse the hell out of T3 when I was younger for bodybuilding. I've had like extensive thyroid panel, not just like T3, TSH, and T4. I get my reverse T3. I get my thyroglobulin. I get my thyroglobulin antibodies. I get my thyroid peroxidase antibodies. I get everything checked to make sure if something's causing my hair loss, like, I want to know what it is. You know what I mean? Like, I get my bloods done extensively. I get my DHT checked. I get my tests checked. I get my estrogen checked. I get my prolactin checked. And especially because my bodybuilding pharmacology background has enabled me to know how to manually address those things prior to even experiencing hair loss. So I already got my blood work done consistently, and I've been monitoring it for years. Like, everything I do is kept in range that could cause telogen effluvium, cause shedding, cause whatever. Anything that could cause a temporary shed is addressed entirely. And, side theories for androgenic alopecia, like, random values being elevated, like, first of all, I hope you would know that estrogen elevation is definitely not the cause. And I can post all those relevant blood values to show even inflammation. That's a big one that's considered too. A lot of guys think, oh, it's chronic inflammation. Like, guys, I've had a high sensitivity C-reactive protein test so many times now. The test can't even detect inflammation in my body systemically. Like, it's literally below their detection limit. It's so low. That's how low my inflammation is in the body. And I still experience male pattern baldness. I can confidently say you need to address testosterone too. You can't just take, like, and if you're sensitive enough, that's not the case with everyone. But you know, a lot of guys, they'll take finasteride, dutasteride, and forget about it. And you shouldn't. You should take everything into consideration and get your blood work done and see what's going on at systemic level. And maybe pharmacology hasn't even come out far enough to address everything. Like for some guys, anti-androgens are strong enough to address the residual, address all their DHT and test. Or some guys, they have to completely crush DHT to zero and then also use topical anti-androgens. Some guys, like one promising thing I see in the future is selective androgen receptor modulators, which for some reason I don't see talked about in the community at all. But that's something, if it gets to the point where my test is severely expediting my hair loss to the point where I can't control it with anti-androgens, with growth agonists, with 5-AR inhibitors, with like obviously 5-AR inhibitors for the DHT portion, but the androgens as a whole, if I can't, the next step above and beyond that is either using, like stronger anti-androgens or systemically inhibiting the androgens that are extremely have a high affinity to miniaturize and have a higher androgenic profile, and finding a balance of a less androgenic hormone that can still fulfill the anabolic properties that your endogenous production of testosterone would normally fill, but with less of an androgenic hit to the body. And even if that results in, decreased sexual sensitivity, that's just the paradox of being a male. Like the only way you could avoid everything is if you had like the ultimate topical anti-androgen that didn't touch your hormone profile at all and still inhibited all miniaturization. And I don't think that exists. There's a lot of things to consider here, but it's unfortunate and it really is annoying because obviously the biggest issue guys have with these drugs is what's strong enough to inhibit hair loss completely, but also keep my sexual function completely intact, not give me, fatigue and brain fog, not impact muscle loss, not do impact body composition, not impact any physiological function provided by androgens. But it's like the androgens themselves inherently, the more of a androgen load you have, the more hair follicle miniaturization you have, and the more of those, sexual functions are fulfilled. Like for example, proviron, masteron, these are all things guys use for muscle hardening and competition, but also things guys use to increase their sex drive and increase their, sensitivity and whatnot. And when you have no test, for example, like when you have men who transition to female, they note severe inhibited sensitivity and lack of sexual desire and all these things that it's just the paradox. Like I'm talking way too long about this, but I just really want to get my point across. And there's a couple of frequently asked questions I thought I should address too. Just with some questions I thought were worth addressing that came up on the testosterone also causes hair loss, not just DHT video. So one of the things that came up was a question about, it's well documented, prolactin, estrogen, and issues with liver. Is this guy's thesis for male pattern baldness? Have you reviewed this guy's book? Blah, blah, blah. Couple issues with your experiment. There's a shedding phase with dutasteride, finasteride. I could show you many examples of people with low T that have male pattern baldness. I had levels at around 300 nanograms and was receding in my mid-20s. Now we can go into the sensitivity argument, which science can't seem to tell who is sensitive and who is not. Makes little sense. It might have been a good idea to show your prolactin and estrogen levels. That book I sent you has recommended levels for these, including thyroid levels in the blood. Okay, so the first thing to note is this experiment lasted over a year in total. Like, regardless, the time the video was filmed is not indicative of how long this actually went on. The entirety of 2018 involved using the dutasteride with just TRT. Like, it wasn't a short experiment where the shedding phase wasn't taken into account. Like I mentioned earlier in the video, was hoping it was just a shedding phase and my hair wasn't actually getting worse, and that I would, have like insane nor would zero recovery and just full density and be like teenage hairline again. And realistically, my hairline, I did notice it was, it stayed about the same-ish, but I just got a bit more diffuse at the front. And I think that was the result of me, well, it definitely was the result of me pushing my test levels up to 2,000 nanograms and leaving them unaddressed because I didn't use an anti-androgen whatsoever for that, to inhibit that androgen because I didn't want to skew the experiment results. And I, thought I had the same theory that, a couple of years ago, I thought, oh, well, if you just use Dutasteride and just bite the bullet, you can pretty much, it's impossible to lose hair. But it just wasn't the case. As far as, the shedding phase was taken into account. As far as you had 300 nanogram, I already answered these guys in the comment section. By the way, this is more for your guys' reference if you're interested. Like I had a good conversation with this guy back and forth. So he was talking about how he had a 300 nanogram per deciliter test level and he was still receding. So I addressed this in the article that I wrote. I don't even remember if I addressed it in the video or not, but the article on moreplatesmoredates.com, I addressed this. Polycystic ovarian syndrome is something that women can experience where it can push their androgen index like way up for female. Consider relative to a male, it's still low though. So women will, if they have this syndrome, basically the androgen levels endogenously in their body, the production goes way up, and the average is somewhere around 92 nanograms per deciliter for a woman, whereas the average normal testosterone level of a woman is around 36.9 nanograms per deciliter. At least that's of this sample size in the study comparing a control group without PCOS to the PCOS group. So this is a clinical study I have linked in the article. So basically, what's the side effect of PCOS? The thing is these women start experiencing severe androgenic side effects. So I wouldn't say severe in contrast to like you and me, males who have facial hair already, but they start experiencing their own facial hair growth, body hair growth that they didn't have otherwise, and male pattern baldness. Like go look up polycystic ovarian syndrome and you'll see pretty much every single side effect associated with it is related to androgens going up, including the hair follicle miniaturization. So if a woman who has a testosterone level of barely 100 nanograms per deciliter can experience hair follicle miniaturization from PCOS, then you can only assume, and it's proven through, the millions of men who still bald regardless of crappy test levels, a guy's reference range, even if the bottom of it is like 250 to 300, even though that's so low that you could have like, low sex drive, erectile dysfunction, and like all these negative low androgen side effects, that's still not low enough to prevent male pattern baldness in people who have a high sensitivity. And again, that's just the unfortunate paradox of being a male. So just because the reference range on paper shows, 300 to 1,000 or whatever it is with the lab you're using, that's the healthy range for fulfilling. Well, it's not actually, because you probably have, low androgen symptoms if you had a 300 nanogram deciliter level. But that's just a reference range of what these labs think is where you fulfill the physiological benefits as a male of the androgens. But it's not indicative of you're safe from hair loss in this range. Like a 100 nanogram per deciliter test level is lower than like the most severely hormonally deficient men on the planet in their 70s. And that's still enough to cause hair follicle miniaturization in women. So you can see just how androgenic how low of an androgen profile you can have to really experience this. And there's tons of guys out there who don't have high test or DHT levels but still have hair loss, and it's because it doesn't take much if you're prone. Like it doesn't take much at all. And then the third part of his question was about the where is it? About the liver and the stuff like that. What is it? Oh yeah, would have been a good idea to show your prolactin and estrogen levels, blah blah blah. Okay, I'll post them up. I posted them in the article, but I'll post them up on the screen here for you guys to see. As you can see, everything's in range. I've done this several times for many years on end. I always manually keep it in range. One thing to note too, I've had times of severe prolactin elevation, estrogen elevation, because I used to use stupid amounts of anabolics when I competed and tried to get a good physique for the stage. I've literally manually adjusted all of these values so many times, and I can definitively tell you it's not the root of the male pattern baldness. Like, I've used Caber to drop my prolactin. I've had my prolactin artificially raised from androgens that cause it. I've had it kept in the middle just by not using those at all and manually keeping it at other times when I was using those drugs. My estrogen, same thing. I've been on like 500 milligrams of test with Debol and had like stupidly out of range estrogen levels because I wasn't using an AI and I was younger and stupid and didn't know how to keep my estrogen in range. I had severely elevated estrogen, yet still experienced male pattern baldness. I've had crashed estrogen to 0 where I intentionally did it to dry out for competitions or because I just miscalculated my AI dosage. Still had hair loss. And obviously low estrogen is associated with telogen effluvium as well. I have perfect estrogen right now. Still experience androgenic alopecia. Liver's perfect. I don't drink. I don't use methylated orals anymore. Even when I did, liver was always kept in range. When it wasn't in range, there was no difference. Like, I've had out of range liver enzymes too. When I used Debol, when I used Superdrol in the past, when I was younger. Like, I have every single value that guys are hypothesizing about, I've at one time or another had it severely elevated, severely crashed, or in the perfect sweet spot, like it is right now. And thyroid, same thing. I used to abuse the hell out of T3 because I wanted to stay leaner with less effort because I thought I could just artificially enhance my metabolism. So I'd intentionally keep myself hyperthyroid, which obviously causes shedding. I've also been hypothyroid many times as a result of that. Causes shedding. I've been in the sweet spot in the middle, which I am in right now, and I've been in several times in the past. I've had shedding from thyroid deficiency and hyperthyroid, to be clear, but that was temporary. That's not permanent miniaturization. And I've made that clear as well in some of my in my temporary shedding versus permanent hair loss video and article, which you can check out too if you're interested. But just clarify too, that's like those things, if you have shedding from, let's say you crush your estrogen into the ground with letrozole, that's not androgenic alopecia. That's just your hair falling out because you're inducing temporary shedding with some drug you're taking, or you're inhibiting hormones that are necessary for hair growth, like estrogen. You know what I mean? So I think that addressed that question. And then the question arose, why do young men have gray hair and old men don't when testosterone levels are highest in young men? So I've addressed that in a video too. The article in the video was called "You Won't Notice Hair Loss Until You've Already Lost 50%." It's probably more like 20 to 30% density you won't notice until you've lost that much. But when you're a teenager, before you've hit puberty, you pretty much have immaculate, untouched 100,000 hair follicles on your head, give or take. The density of that, you don't notice you're losing hair. Most people don't monitor their hair loss meticulously like I do. Like, they don't do shedding counts with their hair loss catcher like I do to monitor these things on like a daily basis, because no one thinks about it until they start noticing it. At least most people don't. So typically most people don't even notice they've lost hair until 20 to 30% of it is gone to begin with. And that's where people say, oh, well, why don't you notice it why do some people not lose their hair until they're like 50 plus? And when you're in your 20s and your androgen levels are at their highest, you have perfect hair. First of all, that's not always the case. There's some people who lose their hair in their early 20s, if not younger, and that's dependent on hair follicle count and androgen sensitivity, as well as the actual amount of androgens in your system based on your endogenous production. But in addition to that, everyone has their own sensitivity, like we've established. It takes years, typically, to burn through 20 to 30,000 hairs permanently. So it isn't that you're not losing hair until you're 50. Rather, it's that you just haven't noticed it until you're 50, and the process has been slowly occurring for the last 30 years. You know what I mean? So it's not like you just woke up one day and you lost 30,000 hairs because you turned 50, but you've been slowly losing 10,000 every decade for the last 30 years. And then you've just hit this point where you're now so diffuse or receding and everything's miniaturized enough that you can actually start to see a difference visually. And then you start looking at it seriously and you start thinking, why did I all of a sudden lose my hair? Like, it's been happening for a while. You just haven't noticed it until now. Like, when I first noticed my hair loss, I was under like really strong downlighting in a club, and all of a sudden I could see through this part and see my scalp, whereas I couldn't before. Like, I had never seen through my scalp before, and then this lighting, I could like see through it. I was like, what the hell? Never noticed that. And I kind of wrote it off at first, and it started getting worse. And then I was like, holy shit, I'm actually losing my hair. So that's why I recommend monitoring your shedding counts, because you don't want to wait until it's at the point where you've lost 20 to 30,000 hairs where you're like, oh my God, I'm losing hair, and then you're playing catch up. Like, you won't notice it until a lot is gone. So monitor your shedding is my suggestion, and start taking into account the possibility that you're prone to androgenic alopecia. Oh yeah, and then recently somebody posted about, I mentioned Trenbolone and how all androgens cause hair loss or can cause hair follicle miniaturization because they all are androgenic in their own dose dependent and based on their own inherent androgen profile themselves. He basically, it wasn't even a question, it was just a statement. He was saying, Tren causes hair loss because it is also converted by 5-alpha reductase to a DHT derivative. The Tren itself will have a negligible effect on hair loss, just as testosterone itself. This is basic knowledge, and you don't have to prove it with your silly science. By the way, how the do you count hairs? So, this is the thing I kind of put into the category of getting too ideological with your beliefs and getting a bit too emotionally tied up, and this definitely does this kind of thing, because like, clearly he was not too happy with my theories that I was proposing in my video. But to be clear, Trenbolone does not convert via 5-alpha reductase into a DHT derivative. I'll post a study actually that on the screen. It is not a substrate for 5-alpha reductase. The compound itself is inherently androgenic. It doesn't need to undergo conversion to a more androgenic metabolite to induce, androgenic side effects in the body. Another good example of that is Ment, Testosterone. I did a video on that recently. It's another example of something that isn't 5-alpha reduced into a more androgenic metabolite and on its own causes hair loss. I actually did an entire experiment where I stopped taking testosterone entirely and only took what I considered to be a low dose of Ment to fulfill the same anabolic and androgenic properties that would otherwise be accomplished by endogenous testosterone. Because first of all, the testosterone is necessary to fulfill the androgen component if you want to have a fully functioning, sex drive and sensitivity and build muscle and all that good stuff. Well, not necessarily build muscle, because that can be accomplished with anabolics that are a lot more selective for muscle tissue to prostate, but that's a whole nother topic. But basically, you need something that converts into or aromatizes into estrogen too to fulfill that component, because having a certain amount of estrogen in the body is a necessity as a male. So that's why a lot of these androgens fail as hormone replacement alternatives, because when you take them, you no longer have endogenous production of testosterone. Therefore, you have nothing aromatizing into estrogen. So a lot of these guys, they'll try and do like low dose Tren or like DHB or like something like that as like an HRT alternative. But then they have zero estrogen because they no longer have, like, when you're taking an exogenous anabolic, anabolic androgenic steroid to be specific, your endocrine system is so suppressed that you don't produce any natural testosterone. So if you have no testosterone being produced, you're not aromatizing anything into estrogen. And if that exogenous androgen you're using to fulfill the anabolic androgenic properties of test doesn't convert to estrogen, you literally have zero estrogen in your body. So a lot of the time, you'll have, compounds that could have otherwise potentially been decent hormone replacement alternative options if they were used in conjunction with oral estradiol. But a lot of people don't get like that deep into experimentation, but that's, something that should definitely be looked at. But Anyways, I tried to see mint inherently aromatizes into estrogen and fulfills that component on its own. And it's looked at in, studies as a potential hormone replacement therapy alternative. So I thought I'd give it a shot. It's not 5-alpha reduced into a more androgenic metabolite, as mentioned. I'll post the graph on here to show you what effect Dutasteride has on mint in terms of how androgenic the byproduct hormone is that you're essentially preventing from, because it does have a metabolite. It's just not as androgenic as mint itself. So, and that's the case with a lot of these drugs too, like Nandrolone, for example, actually is worse for you if you're on finasteride or dutasteride for hair loss, because the metabolite is actually less androgenic than the Nandrolone itself pre 5-alpha reduction. So, anyways, like I mentioned, Testosterone, it's not 5-alpha reduced. The reason it's not is the steric hindrance from the 7-alpha methyl group, so the androgenic potency of mint is not amplified as happens with testosterone. That study is linked in the article as well, if you want to reference that. It just should be noted that regardless of it's 5-alpha reduced or not, like DHT is just an androgenic hormone. It's not the only one. You know what I mean? Like all anabolic androgenic steroids have their own inherent androgenicity, like how androgenic they are in a dose-dependent manner. And even SARMs, for example, which are designed intentionally to be more selective for muscle tissue and bone to prostate and, androgen-affected tissues, even those in a dose-dependent manner increase androgen activity in the body and eventually stimulate prostate growth at high enough dosages. And as far as how to count hairs, I just use a hair catcher. I've done a video on that before. It's not very hard to assess if your changes in shedding are occurring due to changes in your protocol or increases or decreases in androgen levels or anything like that. It's like a $1 investment and you can monitor your shedding super easily, and I use it all the time. And it's helped a ton. I think counting hairs is super helpful. I'm not like meticulous about, well, I am meticulous, but I mean, I don't like literally count one at a time, but it's pretty easy to tell when, the thing's full versus there's like 5 hairs in it. You know what I mean? So anyways, hope that video clarified some things. And that was a super long video, but there's a lot of information to cover and it's not easy to just make a 5-minute video on it. So please subscribe, drop a like, drop a comment, hit the post notifications bell to stay updated when I post new videos. Check out my blog, moreplatesmoredates.com. That's where I post written versions of these articles or of these videos in article format, and I link the academic resources there and the clinical studies that I reference. You can check those out. And thank you guys for watching. Talk to you soon.